Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video we're going to see how we can use the Mediator pattern and CQRS in our ASP donor call applications. I'm going to talk about the Mediator pattern and the Mediator package, and then I'm going to talk about CQRS very briefly on both topics because I don't want to make an in-depth video on these patterns. I'm just going to very simply explain what they do. You can use any of the timestamps you see right now on your screen to skip those bits if you already know about them. So first things first, the Mediator pattern. Let's say we have 4 services here, and these services need to communicate. Normally, you might have something like this. So service 1 talks to service 2, service, Service 1 talks to 2, 4 to 2, 4 to 3, and so on and so forth. These services are very much coupled with each other. Now, Mediator says, instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a mediator object in the middle, and every time I want to talk to this, I'm going to go through the mediator. And just the mediator knows how 1 should communicate with 2, 2 with 3, 2 with 4, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk about Mediator, the package. Mediator has 2 approaches. It has the request to response approach and the notification approach. We're not going to talk about the notifications at all. We're going to focus on the request and response. And this says that one request has one handler which returns one response. So if you visualize this, you can have request 1, request 2, and so on and so forth. And then you have the mediator here. And this mediator accepts those requests, finds the appropriate handler that needs to handle those requests, and each request has one handler, and then this handler does all the magic and returns the response for that request. And that's all there is. It just does it in a way where you just push the request and you don't know downstream who's actually going to handle this, which handler will handle this. This is the responsibility of the mediator. And this is why we use it, because it completely decouples, in our scenario, the controller from the application and the business logic and all that. Now on the CQRS front, CQRS stands for Command and Query Responsibility Segregation, and all it really means is that our commands and our queries have separate responsibilities and clear domain boundaries. Let me give you an example. Normally, you might have your UI here, and then you might have your application here, and then let's say you have a database here as well. So DB. And your application internally has your domain, and there is also a data access layer. And your UI talks to your application, potentially goes to the domain, and then the domain has some business logic, and eventually this business logic talks to the data access layer, which in return talks to the database to do all the magic in the database. The problem with that is that everything that mutates or doesn't mutate data is in the same sort of domain area. And we don't really want that, because it can actually couple against things more that they shouldn't actually be coupled. Let me explain the whole thing looking at a controller, which is probably what you're going to be using. So here I have a controller, and the controller has a few endpoints, and then endpoints are get endpoints, post endpoints, put, you might have patch and other things, but delete, and the list goes on. I'm going to draw a line here, and I'm going to say that everything that's get, potentially head as well, anything that doesn't mutate data, is not supposed to mutate data, just as a query for some data, falls over to the query area. And everything underneath that post creates, put updates, delete deletes in the RESTful area anyway, I'm going to classify this as a command. So as I separated these two, I have my application again here. So I'm going to say application. But instead of having a single domain layer for everything, I have my query model here, and I have my command model here. So all the commands will go here and all the requests will go here. And equally, the things that will actually go eventually to the database For queries, because you just do a query, you could even have a read-only connection string if you really wanted to, because these are not supposed to be manipulating any data. It's just your query domain that's responsible for querying stuff. So querying data access layer and the command data access layer. This is the separation we're looking for. We're not really going to focus on this side of things, but we are going to focus here because this is where we're going to use Mediator to decouple everything. So the ultimate goal for us is, let's say I have a GET request here and I have a POST request here. So this GET request will have some sort of query and this POST request will be a command. They are both going to end up in a mediator, and this mediator will find a query handler and a command handler to handle these requests. And that way the controller won't need to know for any services injected into these handlers. In fact, the services injected here could be completely separated because not everything for this query might be of use for this command. And you're gonna see as we're gonna look into the code in just a second. This is what we're going for, and this is way more manageable and way more testable because you can actually unit test this bit here, very isolated from the whole controller side of things, because there is really nothing in the controller. There's just a query that's being sent to the mediator and eventually lands in a handler. But it's a very decoupled approach and a very predictable approach for our application to work. So you're gonna see exactly how we're gonna implement that now. This video is part of my ASP.NET Core with CQRS and MediatR series, so if you don't want to miss any episodes and there are more coming, then make sure you subscribe and ring the sub notification bell. The source for the example I'm going to show today is on the link down below, so make sure you click that as well if you want to get it. So here we have our API, which only has two controllers. It's a REST API, and we have the customers controller and the orders controller. And not too much magic in it. We have a logger, we have an orders repository here and a mapper. This is not auto-mapper. This is just my own custom implementation. And then we have a controllers endpoint, which has orders and controllers repository. And pretty much that's it. I'm not going to focus on the customers controller in this video. I am, however, in the source, you're going to find the link, have already translated this to the Mediator approach, but to save some time, I'm only going to focus on the orders controller because the orders controller has both a POST and a GET, so I'm able to show the query and the command approach. Something worth pointing out is that I'm returning DTOs here, and then I'm mapping those DTOs to response objects for the customers to consume, so my database objects and my domain objects are sort of decoupled in that sense. I should probably have another layer, but for simplicity I left that outside just to keep this video smaller. Now what I'm going to do is take a look at the orders controller, and in fact let me just run it and show you exactly what's going on. But I'm going to start with the getAllOrders endpoint to convert to the CQRS approach. So here I have the getAllOrders endpoint, so if I click it I'm getting a single order back. But if I use the POST to create an order, and you can see we created this one, then if I rerun this, we now have two. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go to NuGet and we're going to add two packages. First, we're going to add the Mediator package, and you can see the name written down here. And on top of that, we're also going to add the dependency injection for that package. And by adding that package, we can just go to the configure services method and say services.add Mediator, and then specify a type for Mediator to scan for handlers. So in this scenario, I'm going to just say startup. So with that out of the way, this will automatically scan for handlers and register them in DI. Now let's look at the controller, and we have the getAllOrders endpoint that I talked about. We want to convert that, and the way we're going to convert the contents of this is by using a query, because this is a GET endpoint. The GET endpoints fall under the query approach. So let's say query equals new getAllOrders query, and we're gonna go ahead and create a query actually. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new folder here, just a directory called queries, and just because we're here, we're also gonna create one called commands and another one called handlers. And in the query one, we're going to create a new class called getAllOrders query. And this query needs to implement the iRequest of type T interface. And because I know that this controller will ultimately return a list of order responses, my generic type needs to be a list of order response. So we have to specify what this query should eventually return. That's very important. And now that we have our query, we are going to inject an interface here, which is very crucial, which is the Mediator interface. And I'm gonna inject that from the controller automatically, so you can see now that's here. And this interface has a couple of methods. It has and let me just show you. It has the publish method and the send method. We only gonna focus on the send method, which is the request response approach, and that's what we're gonna use. So what we wanna do here really is we're gonna get the result by awaiting the mediator send, and what we're sending is the query that we have. And at the end, we should just return OK result. Ideally, every single endpoint in our controller should just have these three lines: a query or a command, the send method, and the result. And that's it. I'm not going to delete those yet. I'm going to use them to copy them over to the handler we're going to create, but they are not going to be called now. So what I need to do now is go in the handlers directory and just create a new class. And I'm going to call this class getAllOrdersHandler. You could also call it getAllOrdersQueryHandler, but I'm just going to go with handler. And this needs to implement the iRequestHandler interface. And the first generic type needs to be the query that we have, so getAllOrdersQuery. And the second one is the response, and this is the list of order responses. And we're going to implement the missing members, and we only have a single method, the handle method here. I'm going to turn this into an async task because we're going to await some stuff. And now I'm going to just copy these two lines and delete the remaining code from here. And I'm going to put it in the handler. And in fact, I'm going to return here. So now we need to inject a couple of things. But the good thing is that now we're only going to inject in that handler exactly what the handling of this process needs. Nothing more, nothing less. We're not logging anything. So injecting the logger that's being used by something else was just redundant. We didn't need that. And we're not going to do this now because it's very specific. It's very targeted on what we're working on. So we're going to say private read-only iOrders repository. And we're going to automatically inject that. And then private read-only imapper. And we're going to inject that as well. And as you can see, all our errors are gone. We now have the handler. I want you to see, however, that nowhere here do we say that explicitly call that handler. And I'm going to debug this to show you what's going on. So if I run this now, I shouldn't need to do any other work for this to work. This is all I should do. And the add mediator method in the startup should take care of the rest. And I'm clicking this get all orders endpoint. And as you can see, we hit the debugger. So we have our new query. And now we're going to send the query to the mediator. And as you can see, get all orders handler, because we send the query defined here in the iHandler interface, we're handling this interface. We're just saying get all the orders. I have a single order back, and then map it and return it. And as you can see, we have it here and we are returning it. So easy, so simple, so decoupled, and so much cleaner. And you're going to see how it's cleaner in the following endpoints that we're going to change. So now I should go ahead and do the same thing for the get by order ID. And this becomes a bit more interesting because now we have a parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the queries folder and create a new query called get order by ID query. And again, this needs to implement the iRequest interface, but in this scenario, we return a single order response. But we also have a parameter here. We're going to create a property, which is a GUID, and name it ID. And then I'm going to say GUID ID equals ID. and I have my new query here that has a single property, which is the ID. So, and let me just say change below, because we don't want anything below for now. We're just going to leave it as it is. And then I'm going to say var query equals a new get order by ID query, but this needs the order ID provided, because this query object or the command object later will need to contain anything that the handler will need to operate. So in this scenario, the order ID. And then it's the same predictable thing. Var result equals await mediator.send. And we're gonna send our query. Please note here that if you're using a cancellation token, it's also supported in the mediator, so you can provide it here. I'm not using this in this specific scenario. And then I'm saying return, and now if result is not null, then return OK result, so return the order, else not found. And this will throw an error because we need to cast not found or OK to Y action result. That's fine. And then we can simply take this and this and delete the rest because we don't need it. Again, the same 3 lines. We have a query, we send it, we get a result back, we do some checks, and we return. So let's create the new handler now. Get order by ID handler. And again, it's an iRequest handler, returns and actually accepts a get order by ID query. The query comes first and the response comes second. So order response goes here, implement missing members, change this to an async task, and then var order. We need again to inject a couple of things. I'm gonna copy them from the other handler and I'm gonna paste them here, and then simply use rider's ability to inject the constructor. And now we need to do request dot ID for the order ID. And in fact, I could actually rename this to order ID to make it a bit more clear in terms of what it is. And then if order is null, return null. You could write this in a shorthand form, but I'm not going to do that. And then just return here. And yes, in fact, resub just says user ternary, so I'm going to use that. So again, very focused, very targeted. We're using the orders repository. We get the order and we send it back. And I'm not going to test this. I'm going to test this when I also do the create order one, which we're going to do right now. Now, here's interesting because as you can see, we already have a create customer order request, which is a request object coming in. Now, generally, you should not be mixing your domain with your API contracts because they're basically separate concerns. But for this demonstration, I'm gonna actually just use the same object. You might want to use separate ones if you want in your production applications. So now we have the requests folder here, but I don't think I'm gonna leave it as it is. I'm gonna cut this and I'm gonna paste it into the commands folder, and I'm gonna delete the requests folder. And now in the commands folder, I'm gonna find this request, I'm gonna change the namespace, and I'm gonna rename this to create customer order command. And because this is coming from the from body attribute, so the mapping is happening automatically, I need to have public setters for this to work. So I'll leave it as it is. I don't need to do anything. So now our command is actually coming from the endpoint. And in terms of what we do, it's very much the same thing. We just go in the command and we say I request, and this command returns. What do we return here? We return an order response, which is fine. So we're just gonna say order response is the created order we just made. So we just have result equals await mediator dot send the command, and then we basically just copy this line here and we just say result dot id and result, and the rest just goes into our handler, which we're gonna make now. So this is 2 lines now for our endpoint. So in the handler, I'm going to say create new handler. I'm going to say create customer order handler. You could very much make subfolders here for our handlers. So say query handlers and command handlers, but I'm keeping it simple for the video. So handler made here, I request again. In fact, I request handler, sorry. Create customer order command, and the response is order response. Implementing the missing members, pasting this code, changing this to an async task again, changing the request to use that, and then we need to inject again a few things. In this scenario, we also need the logger and the mapper. So I'm gonna copy two of them from the others, but I'm also gonna say private read only I logger of type T, and the type is the handler and logger. And again, I'm gonna use resharper to inject those. So now everything is injected, no errors. So I'm returning and everything is nice and tidy where they should be with separate responsibilities. So if you see my controller now, it's very much cleaner. And as you can see, none of these classes are no longer needed. The only class I'm actually injecting and actually using is the mediator. So I can just remove everything else. So let's take a look at the controller now. We just inject the mediator, which is responsible for knowing where things should go to be processed. And then we have the create order, which has a command and then return something. We have the get order endpoint, which is a get, and the get all orders. So if I run this, it is in fact running. So if I go and get all the orders, I can only get one order. If I create a new one, and I have the ID here as well, so I can see them here, but I can also just say, give me order by ID, and this ID is this. So everything is working as before, but now all the responsibilities are separated. In the next video, we're going to see how we can add validation into the whole mix and how we can use Fluent Validator to do this very seamless and very cleanly. That's all I want to show you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my GitHub sponsors for making these videos possible. If you want to support me as well, you'll find the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you like this video, subscribe for more content like this, and ring the bell as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.